Well, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, depending on where you are, and welcome to AIDS United's Strengthening Human Resource Infrastructure for HIV Organizations webinar. This is the third webinar in a three-part series, so if you've joined us on Monday and Tuesday, wonderful, thanks for coming back. And if it's your first one, that's great. We're looking forward to talking with you and having you with us this afternoon. This afternoon, we will be having a live technical assistance session. So we are excited to hear your questions and for having an opportunity to share your experiences within your own organizations. A few housekeeping pieces on the top end. So we are in listen-only mode. To access the webinar, you can hear us by calling the number you see on the screen and then muting yourself. You can also join and listen over your computer speakers. Do whichever works for you. We will be using the chat function to ask questions and to communicate with us during the webinar. So that's a little blue circle you'll see on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And we hope to see a lot of questions coming through and a lot of interaction this afternoon. And a reminder that the webinar is being recorded. And of course, we'll share the slides and the recording via www.aidsunited.org/webinars, our website, after the close of the webinars. And we will also make available there the recordings for the previous two webinars in this series as a resource to everyone. So let me formally introduce myself. I'm Farah Najir-Cantor here at AIDS United, and our presenter and human resource specialist with us is Adrian Neal, and he will be leading the content of the webinar this afternoon. So you'll have us with you. Feel free to direct any questions to either of us using the chat function. And let me share a little bit about AIDS United. We are a national HIV organization working in the areas of policy and advocacy, grant making, and of course capacity building and technical assistance. We have our annual HIV policy and advocacy days coming up on the beginning of April. So please find out more about AIDS Watch by visiting our website and register if you're so interested. Of course, you can find our website any open grant making opportunities that may be of interest to you and your organizations. And you may also access more about our capacity building and technical assistance resources, including topics like human resource management, at our website as well. And later on in the webinar, we will share how you can contact us directly for continued conversations about areas that might be of interest to you and your organizations. So here I will hand over to Adrian to take us through today's webinar. And before I do so, I just want to remind everyone, feel free to interact with us with that question and answer box. The format for today we'll provide a little bit of an overview of each of the three topics that we've covered to date, and then we'll open up for your questions and have that be a really interactive space for being responsive to your human resource management needs. So with that, welcome. We're so excited that you're all joining us, and take it away, Adrian.
Thank you so much, Farah. Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending the third and final webinar in this three-part series focusing on human resources management, specifically for community-based organizations. As Farah told you, my name is Adrian Neal Jr. I work as a capacity building specialist at AIDS United, and I'm so excited to be able to present this content with you, this content to you, with the hopes that we'll be able to have some one-on-one TA, which stands for technical assistance, with you all after this webinar series. At the end of this webinar, we'll kind of go over briefly about how you can request us or how you can request technical assistance through us. So if you find some content within these webinars that you kind of want some one-on-one TA or just want some more conversations or just have a little bit more questions, please feel free to reach out to us at any time after these webinars. And so, as Farah stated in the beginning, we are going to approach this webinar a little differently than most, and so it's going to be a live TA session. So what we're going to do is do a brief overview of all the functions that we've talked about in the past two webinars, and we're going to allow you all to, ask some questions that you have specifically regarding those functions or content areas. And so once we give the overview and then you all ask your questions, then we'll talk about how you can contact us for technical assistance, and et cetera. And so let's jump right on into the webinar. So a brief overview of the live TA session to address HR management questions from directly and indirectly funded community-based organizations. A screen that should look familiar if you've attended the past two webinars is just our glossary screen. And so I won't go over all the terms, but if you look, these are some terms that we have mentioned throughout the webinar, or some terms that you will see in some of the tools and links that we have provided within this webinar PowerPoint slide deck. Again, if you have any questions or would like a deeper dive into what these terms mean and how they can be applied, please feel free to ask a question within the chat box or simply reach out to us at the conclusion of the webinar. So just a brief outline. The first part of this webinar will address questions about recruitment, then address questions about interviewing, and then address questions about onboarding. And again, before we start addressing questions, we'll have a brief overview of each of these topics. So today's learning objectives, by the end of this webinar, participants will be able to obtain best practice guidance to address their human resources management questions, receive information on where to obtain and how to adapt sample recruitment, interviewing, and onboarding tools and templates, and understand how to obtain technical assistance to address human resources management needs. Another screen that will look familiar to some folks is the HR guiding principles. These are the guiding principles that we at Age United like to rely on when we're doing these type of technical assistance as it relates to human resources. And we really encourage organizations to lean on these guiding principles as well. And I'll briefly go over them. So the first one states, people are the most important aspects of an organization, and an organization cannot be successful without effectively managing this resource. And so what this is basically saying is that people are the most important assets, right? And so, without the people, we could not do the jobs that we do today for our communities. Without the people, we wouldn't have the resources. Without the people, we wouldn't be able to do the testing. We wouldn't be able to do the community events. We wouldn't be able to write the grants. We wouldn't be able to do the interventions. We wouldn't be able to do all the amazing things that you all are doing for your communities. And so to really invest in the people that are doing this work is very important. The second guiding principle is the personnel policies and procedures are closely linked with the achievement of the organizational objectives and mission. And this is really key, right? So we don't want to disregard how important personnel policies and procedures are. And these can be procedures around, time management, procedures around de-escalation of conflict between clients and employees or between employee and employee, policies and procedures around attendance, policies and procedures around performance evaluations and pay increases, and things of that nature, right? We want to make sure that we're adhering to those policies and procedures. And even if we want to go ahead and capture, a procedure around interviewing or a procedure around recruitment or procedure around onboarding. This allows for everyone within the organization to be able to lean on one resources to make sure everybody's doing it the same way. Now, of course, there will be some variances depending on the department that you may be working at or the grant that you may be working on or under, but there are some key things that should remain the same as it relates to certain policies such as recruitment, onboarding, or interviewing, or even when it comes to attendance and things of that nature that should not be changed. And then the third guiding principle is HR's responsibility is to find, secure, guide, and develop employees whose talents and desires are compatible with the operating needs and future goals of the organization. And this is essentially what most people recognize human resources to be, is, really finding and securing and developing employees. So that finding is that recruitment, right? Finding the right employee or the right candidate to fill a particular role. Securing that hiring piece, right? That offering the job, offering the position to that person. And then that guide and developing, and that's that onboarding and training and development piece, right? Are we developing our employees? Are we paying attention to their career paths? Are we paying attention to their interests? Are we paying attention to their growth so they can better benefit so they can better benefit not only the organization and not only the communities that they are serving, but we can also benefit them, which is definitely key and important. So what we're going to do, before we go into questions about recruitment, I'm going to give a brief overview about recruitment and some of the things that we discussed over the past 2 days. And if you, please do not be alarmed at the fact that you can't actually see what I am saying. These slides will definitely be available on ageunited.org/webinars. And so you will be able to refer back to the content at some point that you hear me reading or that you hear me talking about. So like I said, we're going to focus on recruitment first. And why do we want to focus on recruitment? Simply because recruitment reduces turnover, ensures that the person matches the need, and increases employee morale and creates a positive employer-employee relationship. When we focus on recruitment, we are looking for the best candidate. And recruitment encompasses, making sure that we are posting the job positions in the correct place, making sure that we are, being creative as it relates to job postings, making sure that we're doing things like job fairs, and we are, using word of mouth, and we're using social media, right? Some things that are involved in the recruitment process are defining the job / conducting a job analysis, and we briefly talked about what a job analysis is, right? And a job analysis is just simply thinking about things that, or collecting information that will go into a person's position. So things like the duties and responsibilities, the necessary skills, outcomes, work environment, many of these things that will show up on the job description. Also, the job analysis is used to inform, used to inform the development of a recruitment plan, as well as a job description and performance management plan. And so definitely a job analysis is something that we encourage everyone to do within the recruitment process. For those who do not know, there are some things that should go into a job description, which include an overview of the organization, title and overview of the position, job classification, whether that position would be exempt or non-exempt, essential functions and tasks to perform the job, reporting structure, salary range, etc. And there's some do's and don'ts as it relates to a job description. We kind of talked about briefly about some do's, some of the things that I just listed, but some don'ts. You actually do not want to list every task related to the position, and you want to limit advertising to only people in your network. You don't want to limit advertising to only people in your network, and you don't want to use fonts smaller than size 12. Right, and so those are a few things that we went over as it relates to the recruitment process. And so before we move over to the other content areas, I want to open it up to you all to see if there's any questions that anyone has around recruitment as it relates to positions currently. And before we do the questions, I do want to also mention briefly some core elements of recruitment, and that is the recruitment should reflect the position requirements or organizational values. The process should also include creative and accessible methods to attract diverse candidates, document and organizational policies and procedures, reflect staff input and best practices in the field, and should be revised and updated annually as needed. So with some of those points that we just discussed and some other questions that you may have around recruitment, please feel free to ask those now, and then I will answer them, and we can kind of do some live TA around recruitment. So we'll give folks a few seconds or minutes to go ahead and pose some questions to it.
Feel free to use that chat function, the Q&A chat function on the bottom left of your screens to submit your questions, and then I will go ahead and read them out so that everyone can hear, and Adrian will respond. Hey, so we do have a question that's just popped up. This one focuses on job analysis. And the question is, who should be doing the job analysis within the organization? Would it be the supervisor of the person hiring for the position, the HR manager, or somebody else? So that's the question that we have right now about job analysis.
Awesome. Thank you so much for whoever posed that question. So a job analysis can actually be done, or it's a collective, right? And so it should involve the supervisor because they definitely know what should go or into that position, what skills are going to be needed, what they are specifically looking for. Also, who else should be involved are maybe some of the coworkers or colleagues at that possible position or the person filling that position will work with, right? And so interviewing them, asking them questions. All right, what exactly do you do on a daily basis? Does what you actually do match up with your job description, right? And then also even looking at or interviewing employees within other departments that have a comparable position to the one that you are looking for or that you're analyzing to kind of get a better idea of what that position will entail and what it will need to entail. And then, definitely that human resources person that because a human resources individual, the role or I'll say the goal of the human resources person is to kind of be that middle person, that liaison, right? And so that person that can have a outside view looking in. And so they would be the ones that would actually conduct the interviews to make sure there's no conflict of interest or anything of that nature as it relates to what is happening in the actual position. Because oftentimes as that interview is done by the person's supervisor or another person of leadership, they may not be as honest or they may feel as though that they have to, state exactly what they do as it relates to the job description. So they can't actually say, well, I actually do 25 things that's outside my job description, right? And so that human resources person is kind of that liaison, that outside person looking in. So definitely you want to have a designated HR person that can do those interviews. So I would say the supervisor, the HR person, and then even the colleagues or the direct coworkers that person will be working with, and even the indirect coworkers as it relates to doing some interviews about the current jobs or skills or duties that are actually being done.
Thanks, Adrienne. That was super useful guidance, as job analysis can be a little bit foreign to some of us. I've got a couple other questions here. One of them is largely about recruitment, and the question posed is, my organization doesn't have a budget for recruitment, so we usually advertise just in our own network, and we get the same applicants cycling through. What recommendations do you have for different things that we can try out? So I will allow you to respond.
Awesome question. So actually recruitment oftentimes it really doesn't have to cost anything. Right now, if you are recruiting at a job fair, there may be a fee in order to participate in that job fair. And if there is a fee, it's actually usually low cost, especially to nonprofits. So usually there's a nonprofit rate at job fairs that you can actually pay, and there may be some wiggle room around that, right? But even looking at things like social media, so Facebook, Instagram, those are two social media platforms that I see job advertisements and that I know organizations advertise on frequently, right? So simply just advertising on your Instagram or your Facebook page, or if you have partner organizations that you work with. So, for example, if you work with the health department or if you work with another organization that maybe doesn't offer the same services, but you have some type of partnership or some connection, even going through them to advertise your position. And even thinking about venues, non-traditional spaces that you can advertise. So if you know that you are currently looking for someone who is part of the LGBTQ population, then maybe advertising in LGBTQ spaces. So maybe the LGBTQ Resource Center within the university, or maybe some LGBTQ bars. A lot of bars, as you exit a bar, indoor restaurant, they'll have little stands with newspapers or little LGBTQ books about what's happening within the city for that population. They'll have maps and they'll have other types of resources, right? So definitely going to places like those. And even looking at your local stone walls, right? Or just any other spaces that are resourceful. So like if you have a local Stonewall, if you have a local Columbus Urban League, if you have a local NAACP, or other organizations that serve as resources for community members will definitely be helpful. So again, that's those some non-traditional spaces as well as social media. So for example, Facebook and Instagram. And then a third option is also to locate or identify a community liaison or stakeholder, somebody who community trusts and is also a resource themselves. And so maybe they have certain platforms that they can advertise or post a position on. And then maybe using some of the members on your community advisory board and things of that nature will probably be helpful as well.
Great. Another question, and feel free to send more through the chat function there on the bottom left of your screen, everyone. Another question we have here is, states the following: I want to apply for an open position in another department at my agency, but I'm afraid that my current supervisor will be upset with me. And I'm also a little bit nervous because what if I don't get the job? Am I at risk of being fired because people will think I'm interested in leaving anyway? So that really is a nuanced question, and probably something that many of us have experienced. So would love some guidance on that from you, Adrienne.
Definitely. Thank you for that question. Many people have experienced, are experiencing, and will experience this, right? I myself have been in the same position. And so yesterday, something that I talked about was that the goal of an organization, and even more specifically of a department or of a supervisor, should, of course, be to grow that person within their own department, but the larger goal should be just to grow that person in general, whatever that may look like. You want to keep them within the organization. Right, that is the major goal. If they're an exemplary employee, you want to keep them within the organization. So they may not stay in the department, and maybe they've outgrown the department, right? Maybe now they have a certain tools and skill sets to where now they want to be promoted, or they want to learn something new. They want to learn more about the agency or the organization, and that is okay. So what I would encourage you to do is to have an open and honest conversation with your supervisor and say, you know what, I feel as though that I have met all the deliverables. I feel as though that I have grown as much as I can grow in this role, and my goal is to stay within the organization because I really like the work that we're doing. I just think it's time for me to branch into another department to be able to learn even more and be able to impact the organization in a much more positive way, in a better way, in a stronger way, right? And to also grow myself and grow my own career goals. And this conversation actually should be happening, before you're actually ready to move to another department. And what I mean by that is in the beginning of your employment, or if you didn't get a chance to do it then, maybe even starting now, having some one-on-one check-ins with your supervisor each week, and in those check-ins talking about your goals, right? Talking about where you want to go in your career path, talking about training opportunities, talking about opportunities for growth and development. And therefore, your supervisor can already kind of get into their mind, okay, well, this is a person that wants to grow. Let me help them with that, because that should be the goal of every supervisor at every organization. It should not be to stunt your employees or to keep them in the position that they're in, because what's going to happen is that you may feel as though you just have to leave the organization in its entirety, and that's what they don't want, especially if they have great employees.
Thanks for that really thoughtful response, Adrienne. Want to just give another moment for folks to submit any questions, chat them right in before we move on to the next segment. All right. Well, I think we could move to the next segment. And, of course, if any questions pop up, even while we're talking about interviewing that might be more relevant for recruitment, don't hesitate to type them in, and Adrienne will be happy to respond to them as we continue through with our conversation. Adrienne, feel free to move us forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Far. And so now we're going to move into the interviewing section. So before we start getting some questions about interviewing, I kind of want to review what we talked about over the last 2 days as it relates to interviewing. So why conduct an interview, right? Why should we even do this? It takes up time. Why should we focus on it? What's the purpose, etc.? So conducting an interview allows both organization and the candidate to assess the fit, right? And so it's not always about you choosing the right candidate. It's also about that candidate choosing the right organization to work for them, right? So it should be a mutually beneficial relationship once that person joins the team. It demonstrates impartiality, right? How many times have we ran into a situation to where somebody may have gotten the position simply because they were poker buddies with someone, or simply because they knew someone, or they were the family member of someone, and, there was no real interview done. I will share an experience that was brought to my attention at one point in my career, and that was that someone should have gone for a position. I'll describe it in detail. So the scenario was that there was a position that was opening within an organization, and that person was encouraged to apply for that position, send their resume to their supervisor, etc. And so upon doing that, 2 days later, they found out that the position actually was hired for. Somebody was already in that position, and it was filled. There was no interview conducted for that position at all. And so that's what we don't want, right? Because then that makes the employee feel as though, like the organization misled me. The organization lied to me, that they thought that I had this opportunity. They gave me the perception that I had this opportunity, and that didn't happen. That leaves the employee just feeling, I can't trust the organization. This person, who did not possibly meet the credentials, got into this role, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what we don't want, right? We want to protect the organization. The organization should want to protect themselves. And the best way to do that as it relates to employment is to do an interview process and to be transparent about that interview process, as transparent as possible, right? So making sure that there's a standardized system for interviewing, making sure that there are, questions that relate specifically to the job and questions that relate specifically to the organization's culture, values, et cetera. Making sure that, everything is the same across the board as it relates to when you're going to notify the person, as it relates to pay scales, in accordance to the position type or classification, right? These are all things that help us to maintain that impartiality. And then develops relationship with strong candidates for future opportunities. And so, for example, if you've interviewed 15 great people and you've only been able to hire 1 or 2 persons for certain positions, keeping those candidates, on file and remembering them when you're hiring again and being like, okay, you know what? I actually remember this great person that we interviewed. We couldn't offer a job to, but I think they would actually be best for this position. Let's look at them again and go and pull their resume and their application and, interview them again specifically for this position, right? Within the interviewing process, there's some key things that should happen, or some core elements of interviewing. It should be based on position description and candidate's application materials. Follow a clear schedule and demonstrate respect for everyone's time. Documented and tailored position functions, and it should be impartial and confidential. Right? We want to make sure that also we're even conducting the interview when we're talking about internal hires. Right, not just external hires, but also internal hires. That's very important and key. And, you want to make sure that you have an interviewing team, right? That interviewing team should make up of people who, have some type of influence on the job description, who have an influence or who will be working with the person, who will be managing the person, right? You want to make sure that you have a good team of folks, not a lot. I would say maybe max 5. Maybe max 5. It would be great if you have 3 to 4. But you want to have a variance of folks to be able to get different opinions, especially if the persons are going to be working directly with that possible employee. Making sure you have a confidential space to conduct an interview, set time and time frame for the interview. You want to make sure that you have key interviewing questions, right? And so, having some set questions that are across the board no matter what the position. So questions that address communication skills, that address conflict management skills, that address attendance and organizational skills. And then you want to have some job-specific questions. Right? Questions that, if you're hiring for a CFO, questions that get to, do you know how to do an audit? Do you know how to do a budget? Do you use Excel? Can you think of a time to where you've had to do an audit and what that process was like for you, right? You want to make sure that you ask those type of questions as well. And then you want to, have a criteria for assessing the strength of a candidate. And in response to the question, when will you let me know if I have the job so I've made it to the next round? You never want to leave someone hanging, right? You want to make sure that you're following up with them as much as possible. And I always recommend that you should let or notify an employee of either if they receive the job or next steps within a week of the last interview conducted. So if your last interview was conducted on Wednesday at 3 p.m., that next Wednesday by 3 p.m., you should let the candidates know whether they made it to the next round, whether they got the job, or whether they have not moved on to the next round. Some other things that I did want to discuss before we opened up for questions is the type of interview questions, right? So the first type you should have is the tell us about yourself question. So why are you interested in this position? What drew you to this position, right? What experience that you have made you want to come to this position at this organization? And then some skills, education, training, and lived experience questions. An example of that is what assets do you have that highlight your ability to fulfill the functions of this position? Some scenario-based questions. How would you respond if? So how would you respond if, you came into conflict with a staff member, with another staff member, another colleague? And then you want some style-related questions. An example of that is how would you describe your work style, your role on teams, what you look for in a supervisor? Some self-assessment questions. An example of that is what's a skill, experience, or talent that you're most proud of that will help you to thrive in this position? And then a what do you need question. What would you need within your first week to set you up for success in this position? And I would even, take that a step further and say, what would you need within the first year, or what would you need as it relates to career development? What do you need from the organization to ensure your successfulness here at this organization? Right? Asking those types of questions are very key. Something else that I do want to mention as it relates to some interview don'ts is you don't want to ask about age, disability, or health, plans to retire, workers' comp claims, religious affiliations, marital status or family plans, or child care arrangements. These things can make you liable for a lawsuit, right? Because an assumption can be made that somebody did not get the particular job because of any of these one things, just because you ask these things in an interview. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and open it up to some questions about interviewing. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to post those now, and we will give folks a few seconds or minutes to post some questions.
Don't be shy. This is your opportunity to really make the most of the time that you've got one-on-one here with Adrienne to ask questions that might be of interest or value for you personally in the work that you do or that you hope to do as it relates to human resource management, to the work of your organization, your colleagues. This really is an opportunity to just kind of put your questions out there and hopefully receive some guidance that would be useful for you. So I'm looking keenly at that chat area on the screen, and hope to see some of you typing some questions in there soon. So we do have one here. Thank you so much. The question is, what are your thoughts on conducting first-round telephone interviews and then second round in person? And the caveat here is that not all the hiring team members work in the same location. and travel budgets are limited. Let me know if you want me to repeat that, Adrian.
Yes, please repeat that question for me. I didn't hear the first part.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sure. So what are your thoughts on conducting first round phone interviews and then second round in person? And the person posing the question also wants to share that not all of the hiring team members work in the same location and travel budgets are limited.
Awesome question. So I'm a huge fan of doing phone interviews for the very first initial interview. And it's actually, oftentimes called a phone screening, right? And so that's initial screening just to see if the candidates meet the basic requirements of working for the organization or filling that job, right? And so that's getting to, what is the salary range are you looking for, right? So if you already know that that the salary range for the position that you're hiring for is between 35 to 45,000, that's a good opportunity to ask that question before you even invest any more time into that person. Investing more time into moving forward within the interview process, right? And so it's a good way to go ahead and weed out applicants right away, to get a brief synopsis of their experience, and just some other things before you have them come into the interview and you invest time or money. If you're hiring for like a COO or CFO, a lot of times, you'll fly folks in, pay for hotel rooms and give them a per diem or the case may be. Before you even invest that type of time or money, it's a great way to go ahead and weed candidates out. So I'm a huge fan of doing an initial phone screening first and then doing an in-person interview. As it relates to people who may be involved in the interviewing process who may be at a different site, or unable to attend the interview because of budgetary restrictions, I would say, using things such as Skype, right? Using things that will allow you to or enable you to do that virtual interviewing process. And that's perfectly okay. Actually, in this current human resources environment, this current hiring environment, a lot of companies, both for-profit and nonprofits, both in the private and public sector are moving towards virtual interviews, right, because it's cost-effective. It cuts down on cost. And until you are actually ready to get to your final two candidates, it's actually the most popular way of doing interviews, especially now in 2019. And dealing with newer generations and things of that nature. So definitely don't be afraid to engage possible candidates in a virtual interviewing process. More than likely, it is something that they have done and are used to by now, especially given the current environment as how jobs are moving, especially if we're talking about, folks that are now teleworking, it's virtual is now becoming more normalized for many things. So definitely don't let that discourage you. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Adrian. And if there's any follow-up from what Adrian shared, please feel free to type that in and keep those questions coming. We've got one here, Adrian, about involving community stakeholders in the interview process. And the question is, in the past, when we've had a community stakeholder in the interview, they've shared more than we would have liked. What can we do to prevent that next time?
So as it relates to community stakeholders, I actually encourage folks to have community stakeholders in the interview if it makes sense, right? Does the position or does the interview actually make sense to have that community stakeholder? And where it makes sense is if you have somebody who's like a community engagement specialist, right? Somebody whose specific role is to engage and interact with community members on multiple levels, multiple times during the week, multiple times during the day. And so because you want to make sure that they have the type of personality and characteristics that will be able to connect with community members, right? As it relates to, them staying a little bit too much during the interview, or providing too much information, that is when you want to have some conversation before the actual interview. And not just with that community stakeholder, but having conversation with everybody who's on the interview panel to make sure everybody's on the same page, right? Because, oftentimes, sometimes in interviews, it's the actual staff member that says a little too much or that says something that shouldn't be said or gives away a little bit too much information, right? So just simply having a conversation in preparation for the interview. And what that will look like is talking about questions that are going to be asked. Who's going to ask those questions? What's going to be talked about? Are we going to talk about benefits during this interview? Are we going to talk about salary during this interview? Are we going to talk about A, B, C, D, and E inside this interview? Having those types of conversations. Having the conversations, who is going to touch on what outside of the interview question, right? Who is going to follow up with the person? Who is going to meet the person downstairs at the door, right? These are all things that should be talked about prior to the interview. There's preparation that happens before the person comes in for the interview that should take place. And so as it relates to that community stakeholder, they should be involved in that conversation. And they should, probably only be asking the questions and be talking about things as it relates to that particular person in that position interacting and engaging with communities on certain levels. So definitely my advice is to have a conversation with that person, making sure that they understand their role and their function within their interviewing process before going in.
That was super helpful, Adrienne. Thank you. We've got another interview-related question here, and it is, what if we're interviewing for a brand new position and we're not 100% sure about what we'll be needing? How do we convey this in an interview setting without sounding like we are not sure that we know what we're looking for?
So just to make sure I understand the question correctly, you are interviewing for a position that you're not exactly sure what the position will be doing.
Right.
Is that what the question is stating?
It says it's a brand new position, so it could be that they've gotten some new funding. I'm not quite sure what the circumstances are, but they're interviewing for a new position. They're just not sure. There's going to be some flexibility about what the position does, but they're not exactly sure that they know what all the position is going to entail. And how do we interview for the position without sounding like we don't know what we're looking for, if it's something that's new and kind of a startup sort of a realm?
Okay. And so what I would say to that is the interview should not be happening, right? And so if you have not been able to define the job or the position, then you do not want to start the interviewing process. You should have that job and those tasks and those key skills, identified. Now, if it's a thing to where you know the core functions, so for example, if you know that, let's say that you recently got funding to be able to hire an outreach services specialist, and you need to get somebody in that role as soon as possible. You kind of feel as though that person will be able to define their own job or their own role as they go, and they'll be informed. Even though that's not best practice, but if that's what's happening, then at least have some core things, right? At least think about those core things that you will need. So we know that if it's an outreach service specialist, we know somebody who has great communication skills. So you already know that you're going to be looking for somebody who communicates effectively. You already know that you're going to want somebody who handles conflict, right? Because when you're talking about outreach, more than likely you're going to not involved, but you're going to come across some conflict, whether it's positive and negative. And you need to hire someone who knows how to de-escalate that or handle that, right? You probably need someone, if it's an outreach services specialist, someone who connects well with community, right? So you also want to be able to have that. If it's an outreach services specialist, then more than likely they're going to have to be able to track their outreach. So you probably want to be able to hire someone who has some experience with creating spreadsheets or doing a report, right? So probably then that leads you to know that you are probably going to need somebody who knows how to write. You're going to need somebody who knows how to be able to communicate on not only verbally but on written paper, right? We know that we need those types of skills, right? So just thinking about those hard skills, those key things, those foundational skills that you need. And then as the position grows, then maybe there should be some other things that can inform that position. So a year after you've hired for that position, you can come back and you can do a job analysis again and say, all right, and interview that current person in the role. Okay, within the last year, what is it that you've actually been doing that you feel is applicable to your job title, right? And then they may say things like, I have interacted with senators and council members in order to engage community members to put on a community event as relates to World AIDS Day or National Black HIV/AIDS Awareness Day. I've also engaged certain leaders and stakeholders to help write a state integrated plan to end HIV, right? Then those are things that can be tweaked and put into the actual job description. A simple line would be the outreach services specialist will be tasked with engaging community leaders to effectively end HIV within the state of Ohio through programming for Black gay men, right? And so those are things that can be added to the job description. But what are some key fundamental things that we will need from somebody to fulfill this role and responsibility?
That was a lengthy response, but definitely useful. So thank you very much, Adrienne. This next question comes from a fan of yours who has attended the previous 2 webinars, and they ask, what's your favorite interview question, Adrienne?
I will have to say my favorite interview question is, I always love it when people ask me, so I'll do a little background. So I am a dancer by trade. So I'm trained in contemporary ballet and modern. And, oftentimes on my resume, people will see that I went to school for that. And they're like, oh, wow, okay, you went to school for that. And it's interesting that you're now working in training or public health or the case may be. And I always think it's great when someone asks me, have you ever thought about how you can infuse dance into HIV, right? And because I actually have thought about that, right? I actually have thought about and have done things to where I've done HIV education through movement. And so I think it's always interesting and pleasing to me when a job will look at my experience that may not be directly impacted by HIV and will ask, how can this or how can your previous work spill into this work to make it even better or to grow it even more? So I would say those would be my favorite types of questions. Thank you for asking that.
One last question for this round here is, who should make the offer? I suppose when you decided you're going to hire, who should be the person or department to make that offer?
Good question. I would say that probably 2 people, either the HR representative or the hiring manager. And the hiring manager is usually the supervisor of that employee. Usually it's the supervisor of that employee. So either the HR person or the hiring manager, aka the supervisor of the future employee, should be the ones making the offer.
So if you've got any questions for interviewing or recruitment that come up as we move on, feel free to type them in and we will be sure to get to them. Otherwise, I think we could move on to the next segment, Adrienne.
Awesome. And so the next section is onboarding. And so like we've been doing, I'm going to give a brief overview of onboarding best practices before we open it up for questions. And so basically what onboarding is the process of integrating a new employee within your organization and culture, in this culture, and it's providing new hire with tools, information, and support needed to be successful in their position. Something that I've talked about in the last 2 days, that onboarding is very, very crucial, right? It kind of sets the tone for the rest of the employee's career path at the organization, right? So you want to make sure that you really show that great first impression. You want to make sure that you're engaging that new hire from the moment you offer that job. And so if there's events that are happening within the company or the organization, if there's key things that they should know, or there's things that you want to know about the employees. So if you want to know their favorite color, their favorite food, or the case may be, engaging them in those type of virtual conversations. So over emails, especially if they're not going to start until like another week or two, which is often the case because they want to give their current job a 2 weeks notice. So, interacting with them or engaging them virtually and getting some of those questions. So when they actually get to the office, you kind of have an idea of what they like and don't like, so you can decorate their office or their cubicle accordingly. So if you ask questions that alluded to their favorite color or type of candy, then maybe you can have like a little bag with their candy, a card in there, a welcome sticker, in their work area, maybe balloons in their favorite color, and things of that nature. That would be amazing because it lets them know that you care. It lets them, it allows them to feel special and feel as though that, they've joined the right company or organization. Onboarding best practices, using the job analysis, position description, and interview notes to tailor onboarding. Obtain feedback from employees holding same or similar position. Invite teammates to support aspects of onboarding. Review onboarding plan with new hire and revise as needed. Ensure daily monitoring within first week and subsequent weekly check-ins. I really want to emphasize that, right? So we want to make sure that we're checking in with the new hire at least daily, right? Because oftentimes a new hire can feel as though or feel a little hesitant to ask questions or to be a little bit more outspoken about what they need as it relates to their job within the first few weeks or months of their position. And so to be able to have somebody who's checking on them daily or every other day to make sure they're okay allows them to know that, I can actually go to people. They actually care about my success. They actually want me to do well. They want to make sure that I have all that I need. Something else that's key when we're talking about onboarding is making sure the employee is set up for success. So do they have a workstation, right? Do they have the proper equipment? Do they have the laptop or the computer that they need? If their job calls for a work cell phone, is that already set up? Do they have the necessary passwords? Do they have pencils? Do they have pens? Do they have paper? Do they have a clean workspace? These are all things that will ensure or begin to ensure and set up the employee for success as it relates to their job and their position. Some other things, that should be included in a onboarding plan is the payroll, benefits, and policies and procedures, right? If you have a benefits package, making sure that they have that. If you have an employee handbook, making sure that you're going through with them on the employee handbook. I love it when I hear organizations, they allow other departments to be able to speak to the employee about their department so the employee is more educated about all the things, all the great things that are happening within the organization. I think that is so amazing. Some programmatic elements, essential readings, quick reference guides, team meeting agendas and notes, and grant applications. So anything that they should kind of know even before they, start on day one or should know within that first week right away. For example, the grant application that they may be working on, making sure that you have those materials readily available for them so they can make sure that they are knowledgeable about what they're going to be doing. Orientation to shared drive and program files and how things are organized. Shadowing and mentoring and building rapport with teams. I emphasized yesterday how amazing it is to have a mentor assigned to a new hire or to new hires. I think that is awesome. I know when I first started Age United, I had a mentor that kind of helped me become adapted to the culture of doing TA and capacity building at Age United. In previous roles, I have done trainings and workshops and presentations, but it was different than how Age United does it. And to be able to have somebody show me the ropes really helped me to grow stronger in my role. And I think that's really key and beneficial if that can be done at organizations. Some other things that onboarding plans should include is intentional efforts to learn communication styles, align schedules, and establish priorities and goals, clear tasks and mutually agreed upon timelines, opportunities for ongoing feedback on needs, performance, strengths, and et cetera. I think these are some key conversations to have within the first 2 weeks of somebody starting their position. Conversations about their goals, conversations about expectations, not only what the the organization expects of the person, but what the employee expects of the organization. Because again, as I stated at the very beginning, it should be a mutually beneficial relationship, right? It's not just, we're paying you, so that should be enough. No, in 2019, paying someone is not enough to keep them at an organization or keep them happy. It's definitely about that career development. It's definitely about that, them feeling safe within the workspace. It's all that goes into making sure that an employee is happy. They may not be happy 100% of the time, right? Because we both know, working in nonprofit with rent restrictions and all these other nuances and dynamics that oftentimes we may have our bad days where things aren't going so well, but overall the employee is happy and they're enjoying where they're working, and that is what is most important. So having those types of conversations in the beginning as much as possible is key, and already setting up those one-on-one check-ins with employees, with the supervisor and the employee, checking in and saying, how are you doing? Are you meeting your deliverables? If not, what are some barriers that you are coming across that are keeping you from meeting the numbers that are set forth in this grant application or other deliverables that you have to meet? And so with that brief overview, let's open it up for some questions as it relates to onboarding.
Thank you for that overview, Adrienne. Onboarding can tend to be a little bit vague, a gray area for folks, so that was really useful to refresh us. Please type your questions in the Q&A function, and we will happily share those and get those responded to. In the meantime, we do have one that was shared, and it is the following. How can I include new hires in developing the onboarding plan? Would that mean engaging new hires before their actual first day, and how would that work? So I posed that for you to respond to, Adrienne.
So engaging new hires in the onboarding plan. So we definitely don't want to give new hires too much work before they start, right? Because they haven't started yet. But engaging in the onboarding plan, definitely from day one, going over the onboarding plan with them, right? And simply, going over the schedule in comparison to the other tasks and duties that they have to do for the actual job, and making sure that it's feasible and realistic for them. So things as simple as that, as relates to engaging employees or new hires in the onboarding process is key, right? And the onboarding process is I'm going to say it's like a gift to the new hire. And what I mean by that is, right, you're gifting them all these wonderful things, right? You're gifting them all this information, all this amazing and exciting information that they are going to learn about this new organization, about their position, right? You're wrapping it up and you're presenting this in this nice little bow. You're, getting them excited, whatever the case may be. And so when somebody gives you a gift, if they kind of ask you ahead of time, okay, well, what is it that you want? And, you kind of then you give them what you want. Then, the excitement, it may not be as surprising. The excitement may not be the same, right? So making sure that basically what I'm saying is making sure you have as much stuff set up, prepared for them as it relates to onboarding as much as possible without them having to put too much input into it, right? Because if you have to engage them too much in the onboarding process about what they want, then it may look as though, okay, well, the organization is not prepared, right? Were they actually prepared for me to come here? Were they actually prepared for me to do this? Now, what could be done, simple things, as I stated before, is like reaching out to them and finding out, what type of stuff do they like to do, or, what type of foods do they like, right? And so if you know that they like, for example, I love Popeyes, right? And so, if I told that to the person who sent me an email before my first day, then maybe that staff luncheon or that team luncheon can be at Popeyes, right? And so you can kind of, that team luncheon that is scheduled during the onboarding process during that first week can be at Popeyes, right? Doing things like that, engages the employee or the new hire in their onboarding process. But, as it relates to, having certain documents and having certain things set up in certain folders and certain systems, all that should be done, by the employer.
That was a great response, Adrienne. And I think finding that balance between how much to engage a new hire before their actual first day, but wanting to be inclusive and have them be involved in that onboarding process is really important to think about. So thank you so much. We do have a few other questions on this particular topic. One is that my organization is large and with multiple locations. How do we introduce a new hire to everyone in this setting? So kind of reminiscent of the question we received earlier about the first round interview via phone and then second round. This one is now with regards to onboarding within a large organization when there are multiple locations and wanting to introduce a new employee in this particular setting.
So something that I would suggest is doing an email blast, right? And so sending an email with the new hire CC'd on it, that's like, hey, everyone, we would like to welcome Adrian to the team. He hails from blase, blase, blase. He has experience in blase, blase, blase. We are so excited for what he's going to do for our team and how he's going to continue to blase, 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 right? Please stop by his cubicle and drop a note, say hi. Please welcome him via email if you're unable to stop by, right? Something that's short, simple, and sweet, right? Then all of a sudden, you'll start to get a flood of emails saying, welcome, Adrian. Welcome to the team. Excited to have you for the team. Looking forward to meeting you at the all-staff meeting. Blase, 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 right? And so I think these are all things that can be done. Also, on a larger scale, I know there are some organizations that have multiple locations. They usually have one all-staff meeting per year, and that's usually at the end of the year sometime, right? And so they get everybody from every location. It's almost like a retreat style. It's like an all-day, 8-hour meeting where they talk about, the things that were done throughout the year, programs, successes, and all that good stuff. There's opportunity there to also recognize the new hires that were hired within that year, right? And to maybe even have some type of dessert welcome the new hires, or just on a PowerPoint slide, having their picture and the date that they were hired, right? Those are things that can be done to make sure that everybody is aware of who was hired during that certain time frame.
And just one other question that's come in so far, and please don't miss the opportunity to ask any questions you have about recruitment, interviewing, or onboarding. Type them into the chat box, and we will very readily respond to them. In the meantime, we do have this question, Adrian. It's about how do we onboard a remote employee?
Awesome question. And so onboarding a remote employee, I would definitely advise that within the first 2 weeks, that remote employee should come to the office. Matter of fact, they need to come to the office, right? They need to know the space as to where they are working, and there are certain things that they may have questions that are better answered in person. They can get a tour. They can meet people in person. So I would say within the first 2 weeks at least once, that remote employee should be visiting the office. After that, as relates to the rest of an onboarding, It's just making sure that you are constantly keeping in contact with that new hire. So make sure you're readily available. If their supervisor cannot be available, who is the number 2 that person can lean on or ask questions to or contact? Do you have the proper system set up for remote communication? So are you using things like Skype or other avenues like Skype to make sure that there's constant and continuous communication? And engagement. So the supervisor or the mentor that's been assigned to that new hire, checking in every morning. Hey, how are you doing? What are some things that you're going to be working on today? Do you have any questions? Do you want to review the onboarding plan, right? If they have to do certain paperwork with the human resources person as it relates to benefits and payroll, right, making sure that they have those documents ahead of time, and then they're able to review that with the person that is going to be managing those forms, and not okay, I'm going to send you the forms, you fill it out for yourself and figure it out for yourself, and then just send it back to me whenever you can. No, taking the designated time to maybe have a Skype meeting, a Skype video meeting, to go over those documents, those policies and procedures with that person. But I definitely do, as much as possible, recommend that a remote employee should be visiting the office within the first 2 weeks of their start date. That is key, at least for 1 day. And then the rest of it can be done virtual. That is my recommendation.
That's really useful, Adrienne. Thank you. As a lot of organizations are moving to remote employees, I think it's really important to maintain that relationship and that team dynamic. So thank you for that. I think we got one last late-breaking question for this round before we're able to move on. And it reads, we don't currently have a formal onboarding practice. Where should we start?
Good question. And so a good place to start is to maybe do a 2 to 3 question survey with current staff members and ask them, what would you wish you would have gotten or received within the first 2 weeks of you being hired? What would you have wanted to learn about within the first 2 weeks you were hired? What was something that was missed within the first 2 weeks of you being hired, right? And then you'll start to get responses like, oh, I wish I would have known about the other programs within the organization, or I wish I would have learned about the programs within the organization. I wish I would have got a little bit more detail about the culture and the structure of the organization. Or I wish I would have got more information about the policies and procedures. Or I wish I would have been able to meet my actual supervisor within the first 2 weeks of me starting my position, right? You'll get those types of responses, and then those can be used to inform your onboarding process, right? Those can be utilized to set up, okay, well, you know what? We heard this. So what we're going to do is we're going to have one person from each department set up a meeting with our new hires to talk about what it is that they do in their departments, right? Okay, so we're going to make sure that we actually have a designated person who's going to go over the pay and benefits and things of that nature with our new hires more in-depthly and really make sure that they answer any questions that they may have, right? So starting simply from there and collecting that data and collecting that information can really be useful in beginning to build an onboarding plan, right? And then also, doing some just some Google searches and on things to do. I know one organization, they do a scavenger hunt, right? And so what they do is the reason they do the scavenger hunt is to help the new hire be more familiar with, their workspace or the work building, right? And so they'll make a game out of it, and it allows them to be able to meet different people within the building and get certain questions or responses to fill out on their paper. And then, once they fill it out, they get a certain prize, right? It's just being creative with activities. It's involving people within the organization and doing those surveys or assessments to collect that data to help inform the onboarding plan. And, as it relates to building an onboarding plan, that is something that Asia United can definitely offer technical assistance around.
Well, those were all the questions that we've had come through. If any come up for you after we end today's webinar, feel free to reach out to us, and you'll see the email contact towards the end of this slide deck. We'd be happy to hear from you, and as Adrienne mentioned, provide support as we're able on some of these topics.
Awesome. So I do, we actually, this onboarding part is the last portion of this webinar. And so I do want to thank everyone for attending this 3-part webinar series. This has been really, really amazing, and I'm glad we've had the attendance that we have had. Human resources is something that oftentimes gets missed or overlooked, especially within the CBO environment. But I hope, if nothing else, folks were able to realize how important certain human resources functions are. And even if you did not think of human resources when you did these functions, I hope now you're able to group and put things together and connect things. And of course, you know, as we stated in the very first webinar, there's many functions that fall under the larger human resources umbrella, and we only focus on some key ones. But if you would like some more TA, or you have more questions, or wanted to explore a little bit more about the other human resources functions, or even what we talked about in this webinar series, please feel free to reach out to AIDS United, and we can definitely set up some one-on-one technical assistance with you. We can talk with you about how to go through that process and things of that nature. But we really do hope that the content that you received during the series was very beneficial. The goal of this was for organizations, no matter the size or capacity, to be able to go ahead and start thinking and implementing some of these things now. And so we hope at the core, at the foundation, that we were really able to do that for you all. So thank you so much for attending this series.
And thank you, Adrienne, for your great leadership with this Human Resources Management series.